Nation of Caste, the undelivered speech that was later published by Dr. Ambedkar. I would like to summarize in the beginning the essence of the speech that Dr. Ambedkar prepared, and according to which there were some striking elements in the speech or the booklet that Baba Sahib published afterwards. In the beginning, he has tried to talk about the social reforms and how important it is to have the social efficiency. And then he looked at various perspectives as opposed to the fact of social reforms and the social efficiency. And the outcome of the argument that Dr. Ambedkar made in favor of the social efficiency as far as the Indian society is concerned was captured in a sentence. You cannot have political reforms, you cannot have economic reforms unless you kill the monster. So in a sense, that was the whole argument distilled down to this one single sentence. That is, you cannot have political reforms, you cannot have economic reforms unless you kill the monster. And the monster that Dr. Ambedkar identified was the caste. So whether we are trying to build an efficient political system or whether we are trying to build the efficient economic system, the main barrier in order to create efficient political and social structure in India was the caste, and is the caste if we even look at the facts today. So that was a total argument distilled down at the level of this sentence. And then Dr. Ambedkar goes on describing the caste system and how various people are trying to defend the caste system. Dr. Ambedkar is taking their perspectives of defense of the caste system and trying to argue against the defender of the caste system. So he is picking up various perspectives which are defending the caste system, and Dr. Ambedkar is arguing and showing how the caste is a monster. And in the third phase of the text, Dr. Ambedkar is trying to put forth, as it were, his ideal of the society. Against the background of the old society, Dr. Ambedkar is trying to pose or put forward his ideal form of society. Not only that, he also tries to take into consideration the other ideals that the people around him are suggesting, and undoubtedly the social ideal or the ideal of the social organization that the people surrounding him are suggesting is the ideal of Chaturvarna. So Dr. Ambedkar also analyzes the ideals posed by other people. And in this context, the ideal is the Chaturvarna. So he is also looking at the Chaturvarna as an ideal form of society, and he is looking at the feasibility whether the Chaturvarna or the system of Chaturvarna can really be the efficient form of social organization. And after discussing this ideal, Dr. Ambedkar comes to a very important question, that is about how to bring about the reform of the Hindu social order, in a way how to abolish caste. So he is also in this section talking about various ways and means by which the caste can be abolished, and it discusses various schemes by which the caste can be abolished. And the scheme that Dr. Baba Ambedkar suggests is the abolition of the Hinduism itself. But he knows that it's not that easy to talk about abolition of Hinduism, so he goes on describing the religion. So necessarily he enters into the area of the religion, trying to describe what religion really means and what can be the fundamental principles of the religion. And what does he mean by the abolition of religion and how that's going to be taking place. So this is in a nutshell or in a gist the annihilation of caste. So today we are going to begin with looking at the text from these many angles. So the first angle, and there will be some repetition from the previous class, but it's very important to go into that and continue with the discussion today. So as we saw in the last talk that Dr. Baba Ambedkar is trying to argue that a permanent progress in any other field is not possible unless there is an efficient society. And in India, people were trying to plug the weak points in the political organization, and at the same time, some people were trying to plug weak points in the social organization. And we have seen how the two camps or the two political or two parties came into being, that is the political reform party and the social reform party, and how the political reform party succeeded in siding away the social reform party. But Dr. Baba Ambedkar argued that in 1932 the position was reversed because of the coming of the communal award that the British government gave to the minorities in India. So in the communal award, Dr. Baba Ambedkar saw the victory of the social reforms over the political reforms. And then he went on arguing in that text as to how the religious and the social reforms precede the political reforms. And we have seen the cases from India and abroad as to how the religious and the social revolution has culminated into the political revolution. Then he also tries to look at the socialists from their perspective at the Indian problem, and according to their perspective or the socialist perspective, the Indian society can be reformed if the economy is reformed. And Dr. Baba Ambedkar goes on arguing that it's not so. Even if we have the economic reformation, unless we have the social reformation, the economic reformation is not possible. And he captured the summary of his entire argument into the word that I cited, and I'm going to repeat that again for you. You cannot have political reforms, you cannot have economic reforms unless you kill the monster, and the monster is the caste. Without killing the caste, you can't have the political reforms, you can't have the economic reforms. So killing the monster of the caste is the essence of the social reforms in India. So any other reforms which are focused on the families, which are focused on so-called other social evils like alcoholism or any other reforms are not necessarily in Indian context are going to be the social reforms. So naturally they were the defenders of the caste, and they were trying to defend the caste from their own perspective and from their own analysis. So we are going to look at some of the arguments of the defenders of the caste as listed in the annihilation of the caste. So some people argued that the caste is the division of labor, and we know the famous economic principle that the division of labor is the key for the efficient economic organization, which was given by no other than the stalwart in the economic field, Adam Smith. So Dr. Baba Ambedkar is not opposed to the idea of the division of labor. But he looks at the caste as not just the division of labors, but it's the division of the laborers. It's the division of the laborers. And therefore, Dr. Baba Ambedkar says that it's not the mere division of the labor, but it is the division of the laborers. And what is wrong with that is that the laborers are in themselves graded. And the laborers are not only graded, but their value is fixed on the basis of their birth and not on the basis of their worth. And then he tries to apply the economic principle. He says that the industry is not static, or the market is not static. It is always dynamic. It is going to move, and it is going to bring in new things in the world. And the individuals must change if they have to find a place in the market. So if they stick to the old distinction or the old categories based on the birth, they might not respond to the ever-changing market or the ever-changing industries. So thus Baba Saheb Ambedkar takes on the views of the defenders of the caste system, who tries to show that the caste system is the division of labors. The second perspective that is opposed to abolition of the caste and in support of the caste is the biological defense. So some people try to argue that there is a racial superiority. Some castes are racially superior than the other caste, and Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar shows very clearly that there is no racial ground for the caste system. And he employs various genetical and biological facts trying to show that there is no racial ground for the emergence of the caste system. There is no special group of people in India who are superior to other people in India. And in a very intelligent way, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar quotes the anthropological fact saying that physically the Hindus are classed as the C3 people who are biologically unfit to be in the army. So how we can say that the whole lot is physically unfit, and you are trying to categorize people within those particular category of the weak people? The Indians and the Hindus are the C3 people who have no stamina and who have no power. So thus he tries to counter the biological defense of the caste system. Some people, in order to defend the caste system, they try to put forth the economic efficiency argument. And Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar demolishes the argument on the similar lines that the industry needs the people who are ever changing and who will respond to the call of the time, and not the people who are sticked into the old ways. But the economy needs the people who can learn the new ways. So thus he tries to demolish the economic efficiency argument of the defender of the caste. Then there is the fourth perspective supporting the caste system, that it keeps the unity of the Hindu society. And then Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar enters into very in-depth discussion about these two words, Hindu and society. Very in-depth discussion about the words Hindu and the society. So he says that this word Hindu society has to be looked into very carefully, because the word Hindu is the foreign name. It is not the Sanskrit name, but it's the Persian name. And the Muslim invaders gave this name to the entire population of India. And he says that Hinduism is not a society, it is just the collection of caste. And there is no consciousness of kind among the Hindus, there is a consciousness of caste. And therefore, the Hindus, in the strict sense of the word society, doesn't constitute a society. So if somebody is trying to argue in favor of the Hindu society, in the first place, the Hindu society doesn't exist. And then Dr. Baba Ambedkar enters into a very important definition of society, or as to what society constitutes of. So he says that the society is not just doing common things parallelly, like festivals and rituals, but he says that they have things which they possess in common. What constitutes the society of the people is that the people have things which they have in common. And how do the people have things which they possess in common is because of the communication. And therefore Dr. Baba Ambedkar gives a very unique definition of the society, that the society exists in communication. If there is no communication, there is no possession in common. If there is no possession in common, there cannot be any society. And thus Dr. Baba Ambedkar demolishes the argument of the defenders of the caste, who tries to show that it's the Hindu society and it keeps the Hindus together as a society. And then Dr. Baba Ambedkar goes on into depth of this Hindu society myth. The second sub-argument of the argument that the Hindus doesn't constitute a society is the argument that they have rendered no services to the tribals. The tribals in India have not been helped by the Hindus in India, and that shows that the Hindus do not consider tribals as the part of the Hindu society, because the Hindus have done nothing to uplift the tribals. And the third sub-argument against the Hindu society is this, that no humanity among the Hindus. There is no humanity among the Hindus. And this is a very important argument which Dr. Baba Ambedkar gave, that there is no inhumanity in Hindus. Hindus try to organize themselves around their caste feeling. They don't try to break their caste and do the public charity. And Dr. Baba Ambedkar says, or argue against those people who try to argue that they are going to have the purification and the organization of the Hindus. Dr. Baba Ambedkar says that Shuddhi and Sanghatan is not possible among the Hindus, because they are so clearly divided and fragmented into the castes. He says that there is no scope for the assertion of the individuals, because unless the individuals assert, the society cannot change. And what Dr. Baba Ambedkar said is very relevant even in the present context. He says the assertion by the individual of his own opinions and belief, his own independence and interest as or against group standards, group authority and group interests is the beginning of all reforms. But whether the reform will continue depends upon what scope the group affords for such individual assertion. If the group is tolerant and fair-minded in dealing with such individuals, they will continue to assert and in the end succeed in converting their fellows. So Dr. Baba Ambedkar very clearly saw how the individuals or the assertion of individuals can contribute to the social progress. And this is a very important argument against the caste system, that it kills the individuality of the human beings. It's against the individuality. It crushes the individual against the mighty forces of the caste. And the device that the Hindus have invented in order to crush the individuals or the rebels, as it were, is the excommunication, or what we can say ostracization of the people. And Dr. Ambedkar is opposed to the caste system, and he argues that there is no ethics in the caste system. It's completely unethical system because the people have no sense of charity. They have no sense of public charity, and therefore it's anti-ethics. So with this 6 or 7 argumentation, Dr. Ambedkar takes on various views that he views which are trying to defend the caste system, and he demolishes the views one by one. So after taking on the view that the caste system is not an efficient form of the organization of the society, Dr. Ambedkar goes on suggesting or proposing his own reconstruction of the society or his own ideal of the society. So he says that the ideal form of society for him is the society based on liberty, equality and fraternity. And then he tries to argue why fraternity, why liberty and why equality in that order. So he says, if you ask me, my ideal would be a society based on liberty, equality and fraternity. And why not? What objection can there be to fraternity? I cannot imagine any. An ideal society should be mobile, should be full of channels for conveying a change taking place in one part to other parts. In an ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there must be social endo-osmosis. So, social endo-osmosis is a very important term that Dr. Ambedkar introduced in this particular context. And this social endo-osmosis, Dr. Ambedkar termed as fraternity. And he went on to describe the deep democracy. He says that this is fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. So the deep democracy or the conception of democracy is very depth. It's more deeper than mere voting. It has to do with how we live and how we associate with other human beings. Democracy is not merely a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence toward fellow man. I think this is a very crucial definition of democracy that Dr. Ambedkar has propounded here. And then he talks about liberty. He says, what objection can there be to liberty? He sees no objection to the liberty in his scheme of the ideal society. He says, few object to liberty in the sense of a right to free movement, in the sense of a right to life and limb. There is no objection to liberty in the sense of a right to property, tools and materials as being necessary for earning a living to keep the body in due state of health. Why not allow liberty to benefit by an effective and competent use of a person's powers? And then he goes on, the supporters of caste who would allow liberty in the sense of a right to life, limb and property would not readily consent to liberty in this sense in as much as it involved liberty to choose one's profession. What objection can there be to the liberty or right to choose one's profession? But Dr. Ambedkar goes deeper than that. He says, but to object to this kind of liberty is to perpetuate slavery. For slavery does not merely mean a legalized form of subjection, it means a state of society in which some men are forced to accept from other the purposes which control their conduct. This condition obtains even where there is no slavery in the legal sense. It is found where, as in the caste system, some persons are compelled to carry on certain prescribed callings which are not of their choice. Very important when Dr. Baba Ambedkar talks about what objections can be there to the value of liberty. And then he goes on into discussing the equality. He says that what objections can there be to equality? What of that? So he says equality may be a fiction, but nonetheless one must accept it as the governing principle. So even if it may be the fiction, the best thing is to accept equality as the governing principle, because inequality cannot be the governing principle. And then he goes on arguing like this. He says that when we are dealing with the vast number of people, you cannot employ the principle of inequality. You have to apply the principle of equality. And the second line of argument that Dr. Baba Ambedkar gave in order to support equality is this, that it's very difficult to classify the people into sharply marked categories. It's not possible to mark individuals in the categories, or it's not possible to classify them in the watertight compartments, because every individual is unique. Each one of them have got their special unique position, and it's not possible to put the people together in one common basket. So Dr. Baba Ambedkar is opposed, or his line of thinking is in this direction. He says, however desirable or reasonable and equitable treatment of men may be, humanity is not capable of assortment and classification. None among us is capable of classifying and assorting the people. And therefore the statement must follow some rough and ready rule, and that rough and ready rule is to treat all men alike, not because they are alike, but because classification and assortment is impossible. And the third line of argument that Dr. Baba Ambedkar put in favor of the equality is that it is the most practical way in the politics. It is the most practical way in the governance to treat everybody equally. Otherwise, it will be impossible to conduct the affairs of the society. So according to his scheme of the ideal society, it has to be based on the three values of liberty, equality and fraternity. And Dr. Baba Ambedkar supported his scheme of a society based on the three values of liberty, equality and fraternity by way of various arguments. And he tried to show that there should not be any objection to constructing a society on the basis of these three values. But not only this, Dr. Baba Ambedkar also talks about the ideals that is put forth by the other social reformers, including the Arya Samajists. And this is one of the very deep discussion in the text that has taken place in this very important booklet that Dr. Baba Ambedkar wrote. I think we can find one of the very deep and very forceful arguments in the discussion that is going to ensue now. Dr. Baba Ambedkar says that Arya Samajists are to defend or trying to pose Chaturvarna as the ideal form of society. And it is this that Dr. Baba Ambedkar says, I do not understand why the Arya Samajists insist upon labeling men as Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. A learned man would be honored without his being labeled a Brahmin. And this is very important, that Dr. Baba Ambedkar is opposed through the process of labeling. He is even opposed to the labels that Arya Samajists find very, very unharmful. And this is where I think the most important argument lies, and we can see the parallels with the great teachings of the Buddha here, the way Buddha has tried to show how the conflict arises in the society. And this discussion is in essence the essence of the dependent origination that the Buddha taught. So how the conflict arises in the society? The Buddha said that because of our naming and classifying the things into all different categories, the conflict arises. And on the similar lines, Dr. Ambedkar argues against the labels like the Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. He says that the process of labeling itself gives rise to the conflict in the society. If we start labeling people with different names, ultimately it will create a society that will be anti-social. And how that process takes place is explained by the Buddha in Upadana Sutra and in Madhupindaka Sutra very nicely. But here we can see in a very clear language, Dr. Ambedkar explains the same matter in the more modern language. He says, there is another objection to the continuation of these labels. All reform consists in a change in the notions, sentiment and mental attitudes of the people towards men and things. All the reforms, he says, consist in a change in the notions. So it's very important to change the unseemingly innocent names, sentiment and mental attitudes of the people towards men and things. So it is not just the change towards the people, but also it's very important to change the attitude towards the whole psychological process of naming the people. So once you start naming the people and putting them, giving them the labels, you create the same pattern that was going on in the past. It is common experience that certain names become associated with certain notions and sentiments, which determine a person's attitude towards men and things. Because certain names become associated with certain mental attitudes, with certain sentiments. The moment somebody talks about Dr. Ambedkar, we feel good, but the moment people utter another name, we might not feel very inclined towards hearing anything from them. So this shows that the names have the power, or the language has the power over our minds. The ideas or the notions have the power on our mind. The Buddha said that the sadhya or names, the nirutti, language, and prapancha, the whole mental ideas or the ideologies oppress the human mind. And we can see the similar ideas that are popping up out of this text which Dr. Ambedkar wrote in 1936. The names Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra are names which are associated with a definite and fixed notion in the mind of every Hindu. So even if the people are different, but those notions or those names have been concretized in their minds. So long as these names continue, Hindus will continue to think of the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra as hierarchical divisions of high and low based on birth and act accordingly. So it is not just people think in terms of these categories of highs and lows, but they act according to the notions of high and low. To continue, the old name is to make the reform futile. So in order for the reforms to succeed, it's very important to do away with the labels. It's very important to change the names, otherwise the whole game will go on and on and on and on, because the names or the words are not just words, they communicate something. And then there is the argument made by the Arya Samajists that the Chaturvarna is the ideal form of organizing the society. And in order to counter this argument, Dr. Baba Ambedkar brings in the conception of an ideal society given by the Plato. According to the Plato's idea of the republic, there were going to be the three classes of the people, like the laboring and trading classes, courageous of the people having the courageous dispositions, the guardians, and the lawgivers, and the subjects. But Dr. Baba Ambedkar even criticized Plato's ideal of republic here, because he found the Plato's ideal of republic or the Hindu's idea of Chaturvarna very repugnant to the regions. He says that, he argues very clearly. He says, all this is demonstrably wrong. Modern science has shown that lumping together of individuals into a few sharply marked of classes is a superficial view of man not worthy of serious consideration. The science has proved that you can't categorize the people into few sharply marked classes of people. There are so many dispositions, there are so many ways, infinite ways by which people can be categorized. There cannot be a few categorized by which people can be categorized. And he says, consequently, the utilization of the qualities of individuals is incompatible with their stratification of classes, since the qualities of individuals are so variable. Various individuals have the very many variable qualities. And therefore, he says that it's impossible to accurately classify people into four definite classes is proved by the fact that the original four classes have now become 4,000 castes. So he says that it's not possible even to organize people on the basis of a single quality into four sharply marked of classes. And this is a very important argument that Dr. Baba Ambedkar made against the Chaturvarna as the ideal form of the society. Then he said that if we have to sustain this scheme of Chaturvarna, it cannot be sustained unless there is a penal system. He said that this system of Chaturvarna was sustained because there was a penal system, and he gave an example of why Rama killed Shambhuka. Because Shambhu was trying to cross his caste barrier or his caste duties, he was killed by Rama. So he says that if you want to have this kind of organized or an ideal society, it has to be supported by some punitive schemes. There has to be a scope for the penal codes, without which it will be impossible to carry on this scheme forward. So he argues that the supporters of Chaturvarna must give an assurance that they could successfully classify men, and they could induce modern society in the 20th century to reforge the penal sanctions of Manusmriti. Now this is a very important argument. Okay, if we grant that the Chaturvarna is the ideal form of society, but how are you going to sustain it? You have to sustain it by certain penal codes. And those penal codes are none less than the codes of the Manu Smriti. He said that if we try to classify or organize the society on the basis of Chaturvarna, what will happen to the women? Because according to the scheme of Chaturvarna, only men are to be classified. He argues what will happen to women. Are they also to be divided into four classes, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra, or are they to be allowed to take the status of their husbands? If the status of the woman is to be consequence of marriage, what becomes of the underlying principle of Chaturvarna, namely that the status of a person should be based upon worth of that person. So it is not based on the worth. If it is based on the basis of the marriage, that's based on the basis of the marriage of the woman with the man, and it's not based on the basis of her worth. And he says that if the women are to be arranged in the Chaturvarna fashion, they must be prepared to have women priests and women soldiers. Hindu society has grown accustomed to women teachers and women barristers. It may grow against to women brewers and women butchers. Can the Hindu society see women as the butchers and the brewers? So he says that, okay, even after this kind of argumentation, if we argue that the Chaturvarna is practicable, Dr. Baba Ambedkar says that even if it is practicable, let's assume for the sake of assumption that the Chaturvarna is practicable, Dr. Baba Ambedkar contends that it is the most vicious system. That the Brahmins should cultivate knowledge, that the Kshatriya should bear arms, that the Vaishya should trade, and that the Shudra should serve sounds as though it was a system of division of labor. So he says that the Chaturvarna can't work in the theory, and he said that it has worked in practice as well by quoting the historical examples as to how the Chaturvarna has ended up into a system of slavery. So thus Dr. Baba Ambedkar took on the other ideals that was posed by the reformist Hindus of his time, that the ideal form of the society is the Chaturvarna. And that is what the Gandhi said, that his ideal form of the society is the Chaturvarna. And all these arguments can be employed in order to counter the people who claim that the society can be organized on the basis of the Chaturvarna. But also there is a very strong argument which people claim, and that argument is that the caste is also found in other religions. Caste is not found only in the Hindu religion, but the caste is also found in other religions. And what of that? So Baba Sahib employs a very important image, a sociological image in front of us. And he says that the individual is the extreme category, is the one end, and the society is the another end. And in between these two ends, there lies the families, friendships, cooperatives, businesses, political parties, the bandits groups, so on and so forth. Even within this two range of individuals and society, there are many groups within the society. And these groups are bound by the narrow codes, because in friendship we have seen that there are narrow codes, and often they are anti-social codes, because the people only favor each other's interest, but they don't try to work towards the universal values. And these are found not only in India but in all other societies. All over the world, that such groups are found. There are the groups of the friends, there are the groups of the families, there are the cooperatives, there are the business people organizing themselves, so on and so forth. So what Dr. Baba Ambedkar says, that even though the caste is found in other religions, if we apply these considerations to caste among Mohammedans, Sikhs and Christians on one hand, and to caste among Hindus on other, you will find that caste among non-Hindus is fundamentally different from caste among Hindus. So caste among the Sikhs, the caste among the Mohammedans, the caste among the Christians, they are fundamentally different from the caste among the Hindus. First, the ties, how they are linked, the ties. which consciously make the Hindus hold together are non-existence, while among non-Hindus there are many that hold them together. So the ties that hold the different castes together in other religions, those ties are absent in the Hindu religion. The strength of a society depends upon the presence of point of contact, possibilities of interaction between different groups which exist in it. These are what Carlyle calls organic filaments. That is, the elastic threads which help to bring the disintegrating elements together and to reunite them. There is no integrating force among the Hindus to counteract the disintegration caused by caste. While among the non-Hindus there are plenty of these organic filaments which bind them together. Again, it must be borne in mind that although there are castes among non-Hindus as there are among Hindus, caste has not the same social significance for non-Hindus as it has for Hindus. Ask Mohammedan or a Sikh who he is, he tells you that he is a Mohammedan or a Sikh as the case may be. He does not tell you his caste, although he has one, and you are satisfied with his answer. When he tells you that he is a Muslim, you do not proceed to ask him whether he is a Shia or a Sunni, Sheikh or Sayyid, Khatik or Pinjari. When he tells you he is a Sikh, you do not ask him whether he is Jat or Roda, Majhabi or Ramdasi, but you are not satisfied if a person tells you that he is a Hindu. You feel bound to inquire into his caste. Why? Because so essential is caste in the case of a Hindu that without knowing it, you do not feel sure what sort of a being he is. That caste has not the same social significance among non-Hindus as it has among Hindus is clear if you take into consideration the consequences which follow breach of caste. If you break the codes of caste in other religions, there is not much punishment. But if you breach the code of caste in Hinduism, there is a strong punishment. So this is all for today, and in the next talk we are going to look at how to bring about the reform of the Hindu social order, how to abolish caste, because the caste is the monster, and how to abolish the caste or how to bring about the reform of Hindu social order is going to be the topic of the next talk.